Now, for some of the other stations that play new music, if Ken lived in Canada and he has a new album coming out, would they be required to play him because he lives in Canada?
No, they're not required to play him. They pick and choose, of course, but if he was a Canadian citizen and had a new song out and it was getting airplay, I mean, radio these days doesn't take as many chances as it once did. Of course, as we know, in the 60s and 70s, you play a song, we call it right out of the box, right? It was a race on who could be the first to play it. And, of course, the legendary Rosalie Tremblay of CKOC, the Big 8 in Windsor, I mean, she was famous for breaking a lot of hits there that became huge hits all across North America. In the last so many years, it's sort of like, we'll wait and see. We'll see when it reaches top 20 on this chart or number 10 on Billboard. Wait and see. Nobody seems to want to take the chances like they used to. And that's why radio is not the same as far as when you look at these songs back in the 70s, for example, look at how many songs a year that you could recognize, about 200 songs a year.
Amazing.
You wouldn't be able to make a list up like that in these days, in 2011.
No, in fact, in the past 20 years, you can name them. You know, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses and Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, and maybe Elton John with the Lion King, you know?
Yeah, right.
They're few and far between, and sometimes Mariah Carey with a cover.
Right. But you look at, let's say, 1970, the first year of the 70s. There was so many songs and a lot of one-hit wonders again, too, and just so much variety. I mean, you had everything. You had the Beatles for the first 6 months of 1970. You had the arrival of the Jackson 5 that year. And, of course, groups like the Carpenters had their first hit in 1970. And of course, later in the year, Elton John arrived.
And you know what I love was You've Got Somebody's Watching You by Little Sister.
Oh, yeah, great song.
Tremendous production.
Yes.
It's so different from the Sly and the Family Stone album version.
Right, and You're the One was another hit that Little Sister had that same year in 1970. Just a minor hit, but what a great song. I mean, I used to buy all those 45s when they came out.
Oh, yeah, they're all in the basement. I got them in boxes.
Were there hits in Canada that weren't hits here in the United States?
Were there hits in Canada that weren't hits in the United States, Ken's asking?
Oh, yes, definitely, yeah. You mean just like Canadian hits or American hits that were popular?
Well, either one, because I was reading some books, and there was, for instance, in Great Britain, there was huge amounts of there were so many people who were hits over in Great Britain and Europe that were not hit big here. People have had 10, 20 hits over there.
Oh, yeah, and it's amazing, yeah. And even artists like mainstream art, like Cliff Richard, for example.
Right.
Cliff Richard was huge in Britain back in the early 60s and throughout the 60s, and he was big in Canada. He never had his first real hit in the U.S. until Devil Woman in 1976.
Amazing.
But yet he was a superstar more than 10 years before that in Canada.
Yeah.
And of course, in Britain, he was Britain's answer to Elvis, and he was the first rock star to be knighted.
Yep.
But yeah, there's a lot of songs that were hits, especially a lot of Canadian things. Just like you have your regional hits there that we never heard. There's just so many Canadian songs that never saw the light of day in the States.
Okay, which brings up a good question. I'm glad Ken asked that, because this is on a Canadian publisher, Collector's Guide Publishing. Is this the 70s American hits or Canadian hits?
Well, in my book, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, no, this is, I wrote this book so that it would be just as relevant to the U.S. readers as it would be in Canada. I only put the fairly major Canadian hits that in many cases were hits in the States as well.
Which, yeah, that's a good, so now we're on a good tack, like Masterpiece by the Temptations.
Right.
I don't recall it. Yeah,
it's interesting. You know, that song, that was not a song that got a lot of airplay, yet it was still a fairly well-known hit on Billboard, for example. Like if I looked on Billboard, let me see, I could probably see that reach the number 10, which was kind of surprising because it wasn't a song that got much airplay at the time. And if it didn't get airplay there, it certainly didn't get as much here. But, I mean, yeah, I'm just trying to take a look here for the temp.
While you're doing that, I'm going to bring up the Pointer Sisters. You've got them here. Yes, We Can.
Yes, that was her first, written by Alan Toussaint.
Yeah.
That was her very first hit.
And I saw them that year open for the for Mott the Hoople. Oh, it was 73, I think. They opened for Mott the Hoople. And last week I saw them again. Are you ready for this, Ted?
What's that?
I'm watching the Pointer Sisters, and I'm thinking there's something odd going on here. And then I went and took a very close look, and they were playing to track.
Really?
At a huge concert on the Esplanade, where Kenny Loggins just played with, you know, Keith Lockhart. They're playing like karaoke for superstars. I couldn't believe that they were doing, you know, that they were singing to their CD.
Wow, that would never be accepted back in the day, right? I mean, that's too bad.
Now, I saw Helen Reddy at this defunct bar in Boston called the Haymarket, and Helen Reddy came in, and there were a lot of drag queens, all dressed like Helen Reddy. You couldn't tell them apart.
Really?
And she goes into I Am Woman, and she goes, I guess this is why you all came, and they were handing her roses. It was surreal, because this was in what was called the combat zone.
Wow.
A very seedy area. There was a lot of drugs and S&M and all sorts of crazy. This was actually an S&M bar.
Wow.
And me and a friend went to it to see Helen Reddy. I got her autograph. But you had to, I mean, it would be great for a movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
Helen Reddy singing to track, doing her hits, and then she goes into I Am Woman, and the drag queens are giving her roses, like out of The Rose, like when Rose was singing in that, you know, when Bette Midler was in that country bar, with the drag queens being Bette Midler. This was it in real life.
And Helen Reddy's in my book in the Whatever Became Of section at the beginning, because there's 17 music artists that were popular in the 70s that are whatever became of, and she retired in 2002, and she now practices as a clinical hypnotherapist and motivational speaker. She still lives in Australia. And other artists from you remember, of course, Rupert Holmes. He had the last #1 hit of the 70s with the song Escape, the Pina Colada song, and he also in the 70s wrote that song Timothy by the Boys, the one-hit wonder song about cannibalism.
Joe was looking at you.
Yeah, that was a great song. And he was also in a group called the Street People that did the song called Jennifer Tompkins, which was a very minor hit in 1970. But he later went on to become a Tony Award-winning playwright. He wrote screenplays. He wrote, for example, and published the novel Where the Truth Lies, which became a film starring Kevin Bacon. And, you know, that's, again, something else that's mentioned in my book, and the Whatever Became Of.
He produced a band called Luna, Orchestra Luna, here in Boston in '73.
Wow, interesting.
Rupert Holmes, Rick Berlin, and they opened for Roxy Music, and they're cool guys. Rick Berlin is a well-known legend. He's a superstar here in Boston.
Interesting. Getting back to the Temptations, it reached #7 on Billboard, believe it or not, and it reached #1 for 2 weeks on the R&B chart on Billboard.
Oh.
Well, you know, it might have been such a big R&B hit and big in California or something.
Yeah.
Because America was quirky. You read The Hitmen by Frederick Dannon, right?
I did not read that, no.
Oh, you gotta get the paperback edition where he would put an additional chapter after the fall of Walter Yetnikoff. That book caused the fall of Yetnikoff.
Oh, right.
I believe. Because my attorney at the time in New York was Alan Arrow, who handled the Rolling Stones, and I walked into Alan's office and I had the book, and I forgot that Dick Asher was his business partner. And he goes, I just sent out for that book, it was hilarious. I just happened to be in New York that day, and you know, the book is about Dick Asher not getting Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall on the air in California.
Yeah.
That's how the book opened. So there was a lot of funny stuff going on.
Yeah.
Where a hit could be a hit here in Boston, but not in California.
Yeah, there was like a regional hit. There was always those songs. I mean, and it's great to hear some of those songs maybe for the first time, but then again, it doesn't mean much to you if you don't remember the song, if you've never heard it. For example, if you heard a song for the first time now from 1972, I don't know if how you would react